I am a former Marine Corps fighter pilot. Actually, I spent about 27 years in the Marine Corps. Started out as a second lieutenant, finished out as a colonel. I left active duty in 2004 and then joined the reserves. And at that time, I started working for a consulting company. So I've done that. I've been a security integrator. I've worked for a counter drone company. If you think of drones flying over football stadiums and into airports and things of that nature. And then I worked as a consultant, as an organizational development executive, working with CEOs of large organizations and their teams, really building alignment and consensus and guidance and direction. So I have a lot of experience both in the military, and I've been in the business world for about 17 years now. Last year, I decided to do this on my own, and that's when I started Strategic Leadership Consultants. And the purpose is to build inspired, compassionate, mission-driven leaders, because you really need all three. You need to be inspired, and you need to inspire your team. You need to show compassion and empathy. But at the end of the day, you have to be mission-driven. You have to get to the goal and drive the organization there as well. Now, I'm not going to talk about new normal. I hate that phrase. It's driving me nuts. So I'm going to try not to say that throughout the whole presentation. But things have changed. When I met Mary, it was in January. It was with Technology Marketing Toolkit. And at that time, I was brought in to work with other managed service providers like MidAtlantic. And it was interesting to see the evolution as COVID came along and to see how companies adjusted and really how leaders adjusted to what was going on. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because I think it's applicable, especially in 2020, because you have COVID, you have social unrest, you have the presidential elections. I mean, there just seems to be crisis after crisis, fires, next thing you know, there's going to be locusts and cats and dogs living together, right? So I want to talk a little bit about crisis leadership, because if you think about October of 2019, I think we were all thinking about, what are we going to do in 2020 to hit all our lofty goals and take our business to the next level? And unless you had a plan that had a contingency for a global pandemic in Q2, if you did, you're a genius. You should write a book because you'll make $1 million, right? Things have definitely gone off the rails and changed a lot. But a lot of it comes down to how we as leaders lead our team. So we're going to talk about crisis leadership, because right now, I look at this picture and it reminds me of that Robert Frost poem, Two Roads Diverged in the Yellow Wood. He talks about taking the road less traveled by, but as you can see in the picture, nothing's clear. And for a period, we didn't know what was happening next week. Now it's expanded out a little bit, but what's going to happen next month? Some states, COVID's going down. Some states, it's rising. Some states, there's social unrest, or cities. Some there's not. So as leaders, how do we really navigate, and which way do we go when the future is not clear? And how do we lead your team? So I'm going to talk about crisis leadership, and we're going to go through some specific points that I think are very important. They served me very well in the military, both in training and in combat, and they have served me well in the business world also. So let's talk about crisis leadership. I think the number one thing you have to do as a leader, especially now, is ignore the noise. Now, I love this picture. If anybody's doing homeschooling, Mary, this is probably your what you experience every day, right? There is a lot of noise out there, and I already alluded to a lot of it. There's COVID, there's pandemic, there's infection rates. Things are constantly changing. I thought the NFL might sneak through, but the Titans and the Vikings just canceled their game this Sunday. The University of Houston has had 4 home openers canceled. So again, states going up, down. The debate was last night. Whatever your thoughts on that, so there's just so much noise going on. As leaders, we have to push that aside. I'm not saying you can't be empathetic. You shouldn't. You should acknowledge if your employees bring it up, but you cannot get caught up in everything else. You need to bring things in and focus on your business and what's going on. Realize that that's out there. But if you think about it in your day-to-day business, how does that affect you in your operations? You just got to ignore that and move forward and lead your teams in that exact same direction. So number one, just ignore the noise and focus on what's going on. Number two is be a leader. And when I talk about being a leader, you can't be this guy. You can't be the only one that knows where it's going and everybody else is just behind you rowing. You can't be this individual that's so far out in front. If you look at that picture, the other people in the organization, I mean, they're just trying to catch up. You're not out there for praise. This isn't about you. If you look at that picture to the right of the individual with his hands up, the little blue guy in the back, I promise you, I think that guy's got his arms folded, okay? So if it's all about you, this is how your employees are gonna act, okay? And definitely you can't be this individual where they're just setting you up for success. You really have to be out in front of your team, amongst your team, behind your team, even sometimes separated depending on the situation. You have to lead your team and bring them along. You have to show them the way, and yet don't get so far out in front that they don't know where they're going and what's happening. What's interesting is I pulled this picture. It's a statue of Lieutenant Colonel Leftwich. And this was out in front of the basic school where every Marine officer, it doesn't matter whether you're going to be a pilot, a logistician, communications, lawyer, every one of us goes through this 6-month program, and it's unique among all the other services. And really the focus about it is leadership and how to lead your Marines and how to lead your teams. And when I looked at this statue, I passed by this, 5 times a day and never really noticed it. But when you look down at the plaque, the first thing that Colonel Leftwich is mentioned for was leadership, not his tactical prowess or combat skills, but leadership was the number one thing that they put on his marker there. So be a leader, be amongst your team, show them the way, know where you're going, and bring them along. Don't get too far out in front. You have to have them along with you. The third thing that you need to do is no complaining. It says stop complaining. I couldn't find a no complaining, but you cannot be part of the complaining matrix. It doesn't matter how bad things are going. If you walk in the office, your team will read your body language. They will read what you say, and it will be exemplified down throughout the organization, okay? So if you come in complaining about the economy and what's going on in the marketplace and social, if you do that, it's just going to expand as it rolls downhill. You cannot be the one complaining. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you can be empathetic, you can acknowledge, but if you are the one that's saying that the sky is falling, well, to everybody else, the universe is falling, and it's going to be that much worse. So do not complain. As an officer, senior Marines, senior enlisted Marines, never complain in front of junior enlisted Marines. Officers never complain in front of enlisted. And as a commanding officer, you absolutely do not complain in front of your squadron, your unit. If you have to complain, find someone else at your level in another organization, and you can complain all day. COs can complain with other commanding officers, but never complain to your people or in front of your people, because it'll just become exacerbated. The next thing you have to think about specifically about leadership is you have to get personal. The days of walking in saying, George, Mary, Brian, how's it going? Okay, things are going good. All right. And then going off to work are gone. You really have to sit there and be empathetic and think about what your people are going through as well. There are a lot of things that they're concerned about. Maybe they have a relative who's sick. My mother's 76 years old. She has scarred lungs. She lives down in Florida. Yeah, I'm concerned about that. And it would be nice if I were in an organization, if I could talk to somebody about that and share that concern. There's a couple things that will do for you. If you do that with your teams, you will really coalesce as a unit and as an organization. You will bring people in and you will actually buy them. One of the benefits that I had being a Marine Corps officer is that both my mother and father were also in the Marine Corps. And the number one thing they always told me was look out for your Marines. That's your number one goal as an officer. And I always did that or tried to do that. And as a result, the Marines that I had would go above and beyond, not because they were Marines, but because I showed that I cared, and I genuinely did care. So when we talk about getting personal, you have to really listen to your people, and you have to ask those questions. How are things going on at home? Now, I know there's some HR rules about that, but I wouldn't hesitate to ask, how are things going on at home? How's your team? How's your family? How are you dealing? Do you have kids? Are you homeschooling? How's that going? And give them a chance, another outlet, if you will, to vent. One of the, there's 14 leadership traits and 11 leadership principles. And the one that I always hung my hat on was this one right here. And that was know my Marines and look out for their welfare. And that's what I mean by getting personal. Now, this just doesn't apply to crisis. It frankly should apply across the spectrum, no matter what's going on in the economy or what the external environment is. But if you do this, if you know your people and look out for their welfare and well-being, it'll pay huge dividends. Oh, by the way, let's take the word Marine and let's make that clients. How are your clients doing? When you get on the phone for a sales presentation, or you're talking about a product or some operational matter or logistics, are you asking them, how are you doing? Are you guys surviving? What's going on? And allow them to vent. It'll just show that you're human and that you actually care. The next thing is you have to shorten your planning horizons. Now, I'm sure a lot of us have seen that, but normally, we're planning strategically. We're out in that 2 to 5 year mark, and then we bring it down to 1 or 2 for that tactical, and then operational is much shorter. Really, our strategic plans at this point are a quarter, because we just don't know what's going to happen. If you're planning way too long right now, and that's where you're hanging your hat, things are going to change, and you're probably going to be running down the wrong path. So if you're a follower of Agile and Scrum, they talk a lot about sprints. And that's really what we're in. The marathon is gone from October of 2019, and we're really just into sprints. What are we going to do in the next 3 months? And then what can we do this month to make that happen? So shorten your planning horizons. It'll help your teams out too, because they won't get frustrated by going after goals that just aren't going to happen. Okay. So shorten those planning horizons, take on those sprints, hit check marks, stop, redirect, and then go again. With that being said, you can't lose sight of the short and or long-term recovery. Provided they come up with the vaccine here in the next couple months before Christmas, when is that going to come out? How is that going to change the dynamics? This will end. Okay, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it is not a train. They're going to come out with a vaccine sooner or later. Things will get back to how they were. I didn't use the word normal. They will get back to how they were for the most part. So how are you positioning yourself? How are you positioning your organization? A lot of organizations, their employees have more time than they had before. And while that is a detriment, we always sit there and say, we never have enough time to train. We can never get everybody, with everything going on, we can never train. Well, maybe that's the focus right now. You could do a lot of housekeeping to set yourself up for success. If you just bury your head in the sand and look at the next week and the next week and the next week, and you don't take some time to think out to the future and what are the 1, 2, 3 courses of action or effects that could happen. When things do clear up, you're going to get left behind. So shorten your planning horizons to execute, but don't lose sight of that recovery and that long-term picture. So those are really some of the things that we need to think about in terms of crisis leadership. Ignore the noise, be a true leader. Get amongst your team, figure out what's going on, show them the way. No complaining in front of the team. Absolutely not. Get personal with them. Plan for those sprints, but at the same time, don't lose sight of that long-term recovery, because it will come, and you want to position yourself and your organization to be successful and to be ahead of your competitors when you get there. So those are just some of the quick points, and I'll turn it back over to Mary if there are any questions or comments, concerns.
I know I've got a question. This is fantastic. And when it comes to getting personal, like, you want to care, but what is that line? Like, that's something I personally struggle with. Like, I really care about my people, but some people will take advantage of that. And then they want to lock up your time. And then they feel like they can just come and be like, tell you literally everything. I'm like, okay, like I care about you, but I don't care about everything. So, and I mean that. I'm just being real. So how, like, as leaders, do we do that? Like, how close is too close, and where's the line?
It is a fine line, and I know exactly what you're talking about. You get the people that will be brief and to the point. Yeah, homeschooling's going well, but my kids are driving me nuts. I love my husband, but I can't wait to get away from him, at least for a moment. And my mom gets sick, but she's doing well, so everything's going good, and they're done, right? And then you have the other ones that'll sit there and just talk forever. That's just who they are as individuals.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that, but a quick switch is that if you end up with that situation, my recommendation would be to ask them what they're going to do. Change it into a task-oriented. So it's not just I don't want to call it a complaint session, but a dump session, where they're droning, go, okay, well, what are you going to do to fix it? What are your ideas? And get them to creatively come up with how they're going to handle this situation. And then go, okay, good, go do that. And then you can end the conversation. So you've still given them the time, but you've actually helped them come to a solution or a way they can fix it without just kind of being a counselor and just listening forever.
Yeah, that's good. That really helps me, because that's a personal problem I have, because I want to be very direct and to the point. And I'm like, okay, let's move on. Like, so that's that 1% change to make in the interaction with them, because I do care. I care about my people. I want to take care of them. I want, and I feel like everybody on this call listening, those are the type of leaders that they are. I know them personally. I know that their hearts are for their people. So hopefully that helps them. I do have another question just for everybody here. What is the best way to plan for this next quarter? We know that there's still, a lot of unrest, a lot of challenges coming ahead. So what is like a basic, like, how do you set the basic goal and keep it real so that you can crush it? Like, what are your, what's your strategy for that for everybody?
Are you asking me or are you asking everybody?
No, I'm asking you to tell them.
Sorry. Say, you're gonna unmute them? I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to hear from anybody. I don't know if you knew I even had this in here, but
there we go.
Yeah. So in terms of setting goals, especially, I mean, and a lot of what you see here on the slide right now are things that I would apply in everyday planning, both at the strategic and operational down to the tactical level, but specifically from a crisis action planning standpoint, you got to define the problem. What are we facing? Define it quickly. You don't want to be sucked into analysis by paralysis. So define the problem, identify the obstacles, but more importantly, let's look where the opportunities are. There's good. Always a silver lining around a cloud. There are people who are doing extremely well with all these chaos because they spotted the opportunities quickly and responded. So what are the opportunities? Then develop SMART goals, which is probably the biggest one there. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Got to have SMART goals because otherwise, selling more, improving customer satisfaction, increasing our revenue doesn't mean anything to anybody if it doesn't have specific dates and times on it. Match the resources that you have versus the obstacles that you're facing. And those also often end up becoming your action steps. Now, there may be resources. If there are resources you can acquire or bring on board quickly, then yes, you can include those, and maybe that becomes part of your plan. But in a crisis mode, it's what do I have to knock out what's in my way, or can I avoid? You don't always have to run through everybody. You can always sometimes run around. So look at that. Specific action steps. Who does what by when? a specific name, doing a specific activity within a specific time frame. A lot of times I think leaders tend to, there is this movement that, I just surround myself with smart people, and they just figured it out and off they go, and the fireflies and flying everywhere, and it all seems to work out. You act, and we tend not to want to be too overbearing by giving people specific tasks. Actually, you liberate people. I think General Patton said that, tell your people what you want to get done, and then let them surprise you with how they got there and what the results are. So be very specific on what the goals are, what the action steps are, what do you expect them to get, and then back away and let them get the job done. Otherwise, you tend to run into people where they're like, I'm not sure really what I'm supposed to do. So therefore I'll do nothing, and that's not going to move us forward at all, especially in a crisis.
Yeah.
Always have a contingency game plan, because in a crisis, everything is changing, and it's changing rapidly. So you have to what if this to the cows come home. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? Find the most top 3 likely things that are to happen, and then come up with quick action plans to keep you headed in the right direction. And finally, you have to develop a rapid feedback loop. When I was, all commanders have this, but it was very specific when I went to Iraq in 2009. It's called Commanders Critical Information Requirements, CCIRs. These are the things that the commanding officer wants you to come over to wherever he's sleeping, the tent, the Connex box or whatever, and bang on the door at 3:00 in the morning and say, sir, ma'am, you have to get up. This happened. So these are very critical things, what's going on in terms of production, competition, economic forces. These are the things we need, this feedback loop. And your teams not only need to know it, but be empowered to come and tell you, okay? They can't be afraid. So if you give them the list, these are the 5 or top 10 things that you have to call me on no matter what. Guess what? They won't call you on everything then. So you don't get all the other, oh, by the ways that you're like, why didn't you just handle this yourself? Right? So they'll be very specific, and that'll help out, especially in a crisis, because as leaders, I mean, we're still trying to, we're that guy standing with the road and the clouds in front, and we're trying to figure out where to take the team. I don't need to be dealing with something that just doesn't really affect the organization. However, if there are things, I need to know it right away. And that's where that rapid feedback loop comes into play.
And I was going to ask you this too, in identifying like scenarios and plans for contingency game plans, is it better to be like, okay, more vague and say, okay, yeah, like if we lose business, or if we have the opportunity to say, if we lose, I don't know, 20% of our revenue, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to plan through it? Like, how can they take their business and find like more specific, and that's just encouraging to do that, to have, because everything's up in the air, to have a more broad spectrum of scenarios, or try to drill down and have measurable specifics that would genuinely affect your business, and then how to, respond to that.
It's a great question. What if we lose 20% of revenue? That would, to me, that would be a contingency that's more at that operational or strategic level. Because that's where you're, okay, you know what, we need to go to a different business line or to a different area. I would go, especially in these times, more specific. What if client X or one of our clients is giving us indications that they're about to leave? Or that they're about to cancel? What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? And it may be that, we're going to give them, reduced terms. We're going to extend their payment terms, or, we're just going to cut them loose and allocate our resources somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I would get more specific rather than a revenue, but down, especially in these times, down to specific clients. Actions, activities is where I'd focus on when you talk about contingencies.
Awesome. Now I'm going to unmute you guys. Does anybody have some questions for him that they'd like to ask him and get some feedback? I'll need to see, like, if you can raise your hand, and then I can like unmute you. You guys got to have something. Come on. Anything. You got somebody who's got some like expertise at your fingertips. There you go, Letha.
There, I did that. The talking's left to George now.
Do you have a question, George?
It's all been laid out really nice. Appreciate the PowerPoint with a visual with the talking. I've been scribbling. And I want to think that George has done a great many of these things. And that was encouraging for me to hear that we've done a lot of these, maybe not in the steps that are set forth, but overall, we've done a lot of that.
That's awesome. It helps to have that encouragement that, yeah, like I know for me, I'm like, yay, I'm not a loser. I actually kind of know what I'm doing, you know. Patrick, would it be okay if I shared the PowerPoint presentation with everybody to email it to them?
Yeah, absolutely.
If that would help you guys.
Yeah. Everybody on this phone paid for my education. So, everything I learned here, a lot of it I learned as a Marine. So thank you for paying your taxes. And you also paid for me to go to the Army War College. So thank you for that as well. So all this, I look at it as payback. So free to share. I will cover one thing if you're going to share this, because we didn't cover this. We talked about rapid feedback loop. This is one thing organizations systemically do not do.
Yeah.
Across the board.
Preach it, brother. Come on.
Huh?
I said, preach it, brother. Come on.
They don't. Nobody debriefs. GE doesn't debrief, although they're sunk now. Google doesn't. Yahoo doesn't. Amazon probably doesn't. They just don't do this. It's not part of their cultural DNA. A debrief, after action review, a lot of people call it a postmortem. Who's heard of that? Anybody? Show your hands. Yeah, it's something that I never want to go to, right? But a debrief, if you can spell the word, you know the steps. This is what we do once the mission is complete, once the goal is either reached or not, once the project's done. And it's really just 7 steps to help us figure out what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and what we need to do better the next time. So the first step is decide to debrief. A lot of teams don't debrief because they just don't plan for it. They think they don't have the time, and then they go out and do the same things, expecting different results and making the same mistakes, which is a definite definition of insanity. And they waste more time, and they waste more money and stress. So if you put it in, you just got to make it part of your process. At the end of every month, every week, every quarter, gain client, lost client, we're going to debrief. The second step is environment. And this is where leadership and process really mesh together. It has to be a safe, honest, and open environment. When I lead a debrief, we level the playing field within the room. As a fighter pilot, when I was a colonel, I was flying with first lieutenants. I would take my name tag off and put it up on the whiteboard to signify that in this room, this is a teaching and learning environment. Ranks out the window. If I was flying with the general, I would still call him or her sir or ma'am, but we're leveling the playing field. It's all about the mission and what we can learn. So it's got to be that safe, honest, open environment, and the leader has to set that. Brief the results. This is a yes or no question. If you are setting SMART goals, this is very easy. If you're not, then this becomes difficult, and the debrief becomes that much harder. So if it's specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound, did we achieve the goal? Yes, no. If we did, great. Why? And if we didn't, okay, let's figure out why not. That's where the root cause analysis comes in. A lot of times people stop at just analysis. Here's our numbers. These are the figures. This is how much we've sold. Okay, let's do X. And they immediately go on. They never figure out why that happened. So when you do a root cause analysis, you have to ask the why question about 3 to 5 times. Why did this happen? Well, because. And why did that happen? Well, because. And why did that happen? And what you often find is it's an organizational process or behavior or system failure that caused that success or that failure. As an example, I was actually working with a company called Quickset, Black & Decker. They do all the locks. I sat down with the gentleman, the VP of operations. We were talking about all this. He says, we debrief all the time. Showed me his spreadsheet. I started asking questions, and I got to the third why, and he paused and looked at me and said, I don't think we debrief to the level that you're discussing. So ask the question why at least 3 times, and you'll find out what you really need to change from a system standpoint to make your organization that much more effective and run more smoothly. That's where you're identifying the best practices. What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we continue doing? Execute on those. If there are action steps, which is what often comes out of the debrief, make sure that those are executed. If there are lessons learned or best practices, make sure those are transferred throughout the organization. Just don't keep it within that group. And finally, follow up. Now, this isn't just follow up to make sure that the action steps are completed, but you also have to follow up with the health of the team. Sometimes debriefs are negative. It was a complete train wreck. We lost the client. We didn't make the sale. Okay, you know what? We learned a lot of good things. We're not going to make that same mistake again. Tomorrow's a new day. Let's go out there and get it done. So end it on a positive note. Follow up with the team. And if you look at the E and the F, that goes right back to the leadership things that I talked about. Knowing your team and looking out for their welfare, getting personal. This all blends together, the leadership skills and the process. So if you can do anything, look at these steps and figure out how to incorporate debriefing into your organization, because it will change the dynamics of your company. Sorry, I'm very passionate about debriefing, so I got on my...
I love it. Have you guys ever heard of debriefing, or have you guys ever done that in your organizations?
We've done a lot of the root cause analysis when we have incidents with production or a system that in recycling or something that doesn't go exactly the way we thought it should. Then we come in and go through a root cause. You know, what caused that to happen? What can we change?
Mm-hmm.
And in developing SOPs, we've done that.
Yep. A lot of your lessons learned become your SOPs. I would challenge you to debrief normally. So because what you'll find is that people will come up with ideas or steps that will avoid you having to have that root cause analysis when something goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the things they talk about in aviation with mishaps, and I've been on a couple of mishap boards, is that there are chains, links of a chain that all line up that result in an airplane crashing. And so the goal of debriefing on a safety side is to break that chain before you end up. And if you keep breaking it, then you'll never get there. You know, if we wait till we keep crashing airplanes to figure out how to fix stuff, well, that's a lot of taxpayer money in the ground and potential loss of life. So that's why we debrief all the time, so we never get to that point. So my challenge is, even when things are going right, hey, what can we do better? And you'll find even in successes, people will have ideas of how to make things better and make things run more smoothly.
Yep. That's awesome. Did you guys enjoy this? Did you get something out of it to take back into your company and improve it?
Yeah, I think it gives us a good outline of how to get started and stay consistent with keeping the process going.
Yeah.
That's where we fall off a lot of times. We get a little tired of continuing. So this
Get weary.
is a good follow.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm glad. Thank you everybody so much. I know everybody is so busy and we all feel overwhelmed, and you know, tax preparers, they're kissing a deadline really soon, and I know that. So I appreciate each of you taking time out of your business, out of your life, out of chaos to listen, to come join us. And I truly hope that this was a blessing to you and filled you up just a little bit, gave you something else extra. Here's his information too. And I'm toying with the idea of, we're going to try to work together to see if we can't do a workshop here that, you know, if probably push it down a little bit later when everybody's not feeling like, oh, when you can actually engage in it, but to help us improve. And so I'll send out some emails kind of put some feelers out there. But this is something, if we want to bring him in and have him help us, like, you know, we're really good about setting a goal, but the execution part, we start falling off, you know, how to improve that. So he's open to the idea, which I appreciate, because not everybody's willing, you know, to work with people, and especially, you know, multiple companies. So, you know, thank you again. But I'll go ahead and send out the presentation to everybody, some questionnaires. And if you have any questions about this, you know, email me, just message me, and we can go ahead and get on with it. And you guys, you know, can learn and grow. And I'm excited to see each of you succeed and to thrive in this time. And nobody has curled up in balls and hidden and just been sucking their thumb, you know, hiding from the world. So I appreciate everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mr. Houlahan.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody later.